billionaire father forced his spoiled daughter to marry a poor janitor to teach her a lesson. The father thought himself a genius until he saw what the couple had done. Edward Grayson sat behind his expansive mahogany desk, his gaze fixed on the large window that overlooked the city skyline. His office, perched on the top floor of Grayson Industries, was a testament to the wealth he had built from nothing. But none of that mattered now. His mind was elsewhere, consumed with frustration and disappointment. His daughter Monica had become everything he feared, spoiled, entitled, and utterly oblivious to the value of hard work. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. Monica's lavish spending habits and constant disregard for responsibility had been a thorn in his side for years. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, and a never-ending stream of parties had become the norm for her. She flaunted her wealth without a second thought, oblivious to the struggles of those around her. Edward, who had clawed his way up from poverty to become a billionaire, found it unbearable. He had built his empire with sweat and sacrifice, and yet his only child seemed determined to squander it all. It wasn't that he hadn't tried to guide her. From private schools to personal mentors, he had spared no expense in ensuring that Monica received the best education and upbringing. But none of it had worked. She remained impervious to his lectures about responsibility and humility. The more he tried to reach her, the further she drifted into a world of excess and indulgence. And now, at 24, she was a woman who had never known a day of real struggle in her life. Edward slammed his hand on the desk in frustration. This had to stop. He couldn't watch her waste her life any longer. There had to be a way to teach her, something drastic enough to break through her arrogance, to strip away the layers of entitlement and make her understand what it meant to live without luxury. That's when the idea hit him. It was extreme, yes, but he was at his wit's end. He had tried everything else, and nothing had worked. If Monica couldn't appreciate the life she had, then perhaps the only way to open her eyes was to take it away. She needed to understand the world outside her bubble of privilege, and there was only one way to make that happen: force her to live it. He picked up the phone and dialed a number, his fingers drumming impatiently on the desk as he waited. The call was short, a few clipped sentences exchanged before Edward hung up. His mind was made up. Monica would marry Marcus, the janitor who worked in one of Grayson Industries' office buildings. Marcus had no wealth, no connections, no influence. He was the antithesis of the world Monica lived in. If anything could humble her, it would be this. A knock at the door broke Edward's train of thought. His assistant, Lydia, stepped in, her expression cautious as she held out a file. "Mr. Grayson, the report you asked for." Edward waved it away. "Not now, Lydia." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and left quietly, sensing the tension in the room. Edward stood pacing the length of his office, his mind racing. He knew this decision would infuriate Monica. She would see it as a punishment, a betrayal even. But what choice did he have? If she continued on this path, she would ruin not just herself, but everything he had built. Hours later, Monica arrived at the family estate, summoned by her father's cryptic message. She strolled into his office, her usual air of confidence radiating from her as she greeted him with a casual, "What's this about, Dad?" Edward didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid out his plan bluntly, his voice firm and unyielding. "You're going to marry Marcus." Monica's face froze, her smile fading into disbelief. "Excuse me? Marcus, the janitor. You'll marry him. It's done." The silence that followed was deafening. Monica stared at her father, her mind struggling to comprehend the words that had just come out of his mouth. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled with rage. "You can't be serious." "I am," Edward replied, his tone cold and final. "You've lived a life of privilege without appreciating any of it. That ends now. You will marry Marcus, and you will learn what it means to live without everything handed to you on a silver platter." Monica's eyes flashed with fury. "You're punishing me because I don't fit into your perfect little box? This is insane." Edward met her glare with one of his own. "No, this is necessary. You need to understand that money and power don't define you. You need to learn humility, and this is the only way I know how to teach you." Monica stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her. Edward remained standing, his hands clenched into fists. He didn't know if this plan would work, but one thing was certain. He couldn't stand by and watch his daughter spiral any longer. Monica sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as she stared at the engagement ring resting on her nightstand. A delicate gold band with a small, unremarkable diamond. It felt like a mockery, nothing like the grand, glittering jewels she had imagined she'd wear when she finally got married. She hadn't even wanted to touch it, much less wear it, but her father had made it clear there was no escaping this. The marriage was going to happen whether she liked it or not. She felt trapped, humiliated. How could her father, the man who had given her everything, force her into such a degrading situation? Monica had always been the center of attention, adored by her friends and envied for her lifestyle. But now her friends whispered behind her back, mocking her fall from grace. The invitations to parties had stopped, and the life of luxury she had always known felt like it was slipping away, piece by piece. Her thoughts drifted to Marcus, the man she had been forced to marry, a janitor. Her father hadn't even chosen someone respectable, just some random worker from one of his buildings. She barely remembered Marcus from the first time she saw him, sweeping floors or fixing something in the office, blending into the background like he was meant to. Now he was her husband, and it infuriated her. He didn't even try to talk to her, to explain himself, or offer any words of sympathy. It was as if he didn't care, and maybe he didn't. Monica had no idea what Marcus's life was like, but she had convinced herself that he was nothing more than an opportunist, someone who was using this twisted arrangement to elevate himself from his lowly station. Why else would he agree to marry her under such absurd circumstances? He had to know this wasn't a real marriage. She hadn't signed up for this. She had dreams, ambitions, plans for her future that didn't involve being married to a janitor. But Marcus didn't seem to have any ambitions, at least none that she could see. He was quiet, almost annoyingly so. They had exchanged only a handful of words since their wedding, and it was always out of necessity. Practical things like dinner's on the table or I'll be home late. He didn't argue, didn't push, didn't try to make her life harder than it already was. If anything, he seemed to exist in the background of their shared space, as if he didn't want to intrude on her life. At first, she had been relieved by the silence. It made it easier to ignore him. She could pretend he didn't exist, that none of this was happening. But now, the quiet weighed on her. The mansion, once a symbol of her success, felt like a gilded cage, and the silence only amplified her isolation. Every morning, Marcus would leave early for his job, and every evening he would come back, exhausted from his work, saying little before retreating to his side of the house. They barely crossed paths, and when they did, the tension between them was thick, unspoken but undeniable. She had started leaving the house more often, anything to avoid the suffocating atmosphere between them. Long drives, shopping sprees, anything to distract herself from the reality of her situation. But even those distractions weren't enough. The whispers from her former friends lingered in her mind. The pitying looks, the snide comments. She could feel her social status slipping through her fingers, and with it, the life she had always known. Meanwhile, Marcus didn't seem to mind the arrangement. He never complained, never questioned her behavior. He kept to himself, maintaining the same steady routine he'd had since the day they married. She couldn't understand it. How could he be so indifferent to the life they were forced to share? It was as though he had accepted his role, while she was left to fume in silence, waiting for the day her father would come to his senses and put an end to this absurd charade. But deep down, Monica knew her father wasn't going to change his mind. This was his way of teaching her a lesson, and he was too stubborn to back down. The thought filled her with rage, but also with fear. What if this was her life now? What if she was stuck like this, living with a man she barely knew, Trapped in a marriage she never wanted, the future felt uncertain, and for the first time in her life, Monica realized she had no control over what would happen next. Her only certainty was that she wasn't going to let this break her. Not now, not ever. The days passed slowly, and Monica's anger simmered beneath the surface. But something about Marcus began to gnaw at her. He wasn't at all what she had expected. In the beginning, it was easy to dismiss him as just the quiet, unassuming janitor her father had chosen to teach her. Some twisted lesson, but as time went on, Monica began to notice things, small things that didn't quite fit the image of a lowly worker. It started with the way he carried himself. He didn't have the posture of someone beaten down by life. His movements were confident, almost deliberate, as if he had a purpose for everything he did. He worked around the house with ease, fixing things without ever needing help. The leaky faucet in the kitchen that had been driving her crazy for weeks, Marcus repaired it in an afternoon. The ancient air conditioner that constantly broke down, he had it running perfectly within an hour. His competence was undeniable, and it irked her. How could a janitor know so much about fixing things? At first, Monica tried to ignore it, to chalk it up to luck or some practical skills he'd picked up along the way. But then there were the moments when she'd overhear him talking to himself, brief snippets of conversation that gave her pause. Once, she caught him muttering about a business model while going through some documents on the dining room table. Another time, she overheard him on the phone, speaking in a way that sounded, well, smart, far more knowledgeable and articulate than she'd ever imagined he could be. One evening, they found themselves sitting at opposite ends of the table, silently eating dinner. Monica pushed her food around on her plate, distracted by her thoughts, but she couldn't help but glance at Marcus. He sat quietly, his focus entirely on his meal, not offering a single word to break the silence. She should have been relieved. This was exactly what she wanted. Distance, separation, a cold, clear line between them. But instead, her curiosity got the better of her. "Why do you never talk?" she blurted out before she could stop herself. Marcus paused mid-bite and looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He set down his fork, his expression unreadable as he studied her for a moment. "I didn't think you wanted to hear anything I had to say," he replied evenly. Monica huffed, more frustrated with herself for starting the conversation than anything else. "It's not that. It's just, I don't know anything about you. You just show up, do your thing, and that's it. Aren't you even a little curious about the person you're married to?" Marcus leaned back slightly, his dark eyes reflecting a calmness that seemed to diffuse the tension. "I figured the less we talked, the easier this would be for you," he said simply. "But if you want to know, just ask." Monica wasn't sure what had compelled her to ask in the first place, but now that the door was open, she couldn't help but step through it. "Fine. What's your story? How'd you end up here?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he took a deep breath. "I wasn't always a janitor," he began. "I used to be an engineer. I had my own startup a few years ago. Tech company. We developed software for small businesses, something to help them streamline their operations." Monica blinked, taken aback. That was not the answer she had been expecting. "An engineer?" she repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You?" "Yeah," Marcus said, his gaze steady. "I built the company from the ground up. We were doing well for a while too, but then things fell apart. The company collapsed, and I lost everything." Her skepticism softened, replaced by a flicker of intrigue. "What happened?" He hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "Bad business decisions, I guess. Some things were out of my control. The tech industry's tough. One wrong move, and it's all gone." Monica didn't know how to respond. She had always assumed Marcus was just some lowly worker, content to mop floors for a paycheck. But this was something different. She could sense there was more to his story, but for now, she remained silent, absorbing the weight of what he had just told her. As the evening wore on, Monica found herself thinking about Marcus in a way she hadn't before. There was a depth to him she hadn't anticipated, and it unsettled her. This wasn't just some random man her father had picked to punish her. He had a past, a story, a life before all of this. And for the first time since they'd been forced together, Monica felt a spark of something unfamiliar. Curiosity. And with that curiosity came the realization that perhaps, just perhaps, she had underestimated Marcus. Monica couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Marcus than he was letting on. His quiet revelation about being an engineer haunted her thoughts, and she found herself growing increasingly obsessed with uncovering the truth. For the first time in her life, something didn't add up in the world she had always known, and she couldn't rest until she understood it. Over the next few days, she began to dig deeper, quietly researching Marcus's past without his knowledge. What she found only deepened her confusion. A quick search online brought up articles about his old tech company, a small but promising startup called NovaStream that had once been poised for success. Monica skimmed through the old news reports and interviews with Marcus, her heart racing as she read about the potential his company had shown. But it all came to an abrupt end after a major acquisition deal went south, leading to NovaStream's downfall. One detail in particular caught her eye: the name of the company that had acquired Marcus's technology. Grayson Industries. Monica felt her breath catch in her throat as she stared at the screen. Her father's company. He had always been proud of the way he built his empire, often boasting about the strategic acquisitions that helped fuel its growth. But this, it couldn't be a coincidence. Her father had acquired NovaStream and, in doing so, destroyed Marcus's business, paving the way for him to end up as a janitor in the very empire that had taken everything from him. The realization left her reeling. Why hadn't Marcus told her? Why hadn't he said anything about her father's role in his downfall? Was this marriage just part of some larger plan he had to get back at the Grayson family? The thought made her stomach churn, but more than anything, she felt a pang of guilt. She had spent weeks treating Marcus as though he was beneath her, convinced he had nothing of value to offer. Now she understood that his life had been irreversibly changed by the same man she had once idolized. Determined to get answers, Monica confronted Marcus that evening after he returned from work. She could hardly keep the accusation out of her voice as she stood in the doorway to the kitchen, arms crossed, her expression sharp. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. Marcus, who had been washing dishes at the sink, glanced over his shoulder, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Tell you what?" "About NovaStream, about how my father destroyed your company," she said, her voice trembling with anger and disbelief. "You've known this whole time, haven't you?" Marcus's face remained calm, but his eyes darkened as he set the dish down and turned to face her fully. He didn't deny it. "I didn't think it would make a difference," he said quietly. "What's done is done." Monica took a step forward, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You've been working for him. Working for us? After what he did to you? How could you stay quiet about something like that?" Marcus's expression softened, but there was a weariness in his eyes that Monica hadn't noticed before. "What would telling you have changed, Monica? Would it have stopped him from crushing my company? From ruining my life?" His words hung in the air between them, and for the first time, Monica felt the full weight of what her father had done. It wasn't just about the money or the loss of a business. Marcus had built something from the ground up, only to have it taken away in an instant. And while she had lived in luxury, oblivious to the consequences of her father's actions, Marcus had been left to pick up the pieces. "I didn't stay quiet because I was afraid," Marcus continued, his voice steady but tinged with bitterness. "I stayed quiet because I didn't see the point in reopening old wounds. But make no mistake, I didn't agree to this marriage out of the goodness of my heart." Monica's breath caught at the edge of his words. "Then why?" "I wanted justice," Marcus said simply, meeting her gaze. "Not revenge, justice. For me, and for the others, your father has stepped on to get where he is. This marriage was a way to get closer to the Grayson family, to see the empire from the inside. I wasn't going to let him destroy me and walk away without consequence. The intensity in his voice sent a chill through Monica, but something else flickered in her chest. An understanding, a recognition of her own complicity in the empire her father had built. She had never questioned it, never thought about the people who had been harmed in the process. For a long moment they stood in silence, the distance between them filled with unspoken truths. Finally, Marcus broke the quiet. I didn't tell you because I didn't see the point, but if you really want to know the truth, then you should ask yourself why it's bothering you now. Monica's heart pounded in her chest as she met his gaze, her mind swirling with everything she had just learned. For the first time in her life, she saw the world through different eyes, and it terrified her. Monica couldn't stop thinking about what Marcus had told her. The truth sat heavy in her chest, like a stone she couldn't dislodge. The father she had idolized, the man she had always believed to be fair and just, had built his empire on the backs of people like Marcus. People whose dreams had been crushed, whose lives had been upended in the name of profit. And all this time, she had been blind to it. She had spent her life basking in the glow of her father's success, never questioning where it came from or who might have been hurt along the way. But now, with the reality of Marcus's past staring her in the face, she couldn't avoid the truth any longer. Her father wasn't the hero she had once believed him to be. He was ruthless, willing to destroy anything and anyone in his path if it meant adding another zero to his bank account. Monica sat alone in the dimly lit living room, her mind spinning. Marcus had left the house for a walk, giving her the space she needed to process everything. She had no idea what to do next or how to confront the growing conflict inside her. Part of her still clung to the image of her father, the man who had provided for her, who had given her every advantage in life. But another part, a new part, felt disgusted by the thought of continuing to benefit from an empire built on exploitation. When Marcus returned, he found her sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the floor. For a moment he hesitated, unsure whether to speak, but something had shifted between them after their confrontation. Monica wasn't the same spoiled, self-absorbed woman she had been weeks ago. She had seen something that had shaken her to her core, and Marcus knew she wouldn't be able to go back to her old life unchanged. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice cautious. Monica looked up, her eyes clouded with confusion and anger. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know what to think anymore." Marcus sat down across from her, giving her space but close enough to listen. "It's a lot to take in. I get that." Monica took a deep breath, her fingers knotting together in her lap. "I've spent my whole life thinking my father was a good man, that what he built was something to be proud of. But now, I don't even know who he is." Marcus didn't interrupt. He could see she was working through something difficult, and he knew better than to push her. Instead, he waited, letting her speak when she was ready. "I can't believe I never questioned it," Monica continued, her voice cracking with frustration. "I just accepted it all. The money, the luxury. I never thought about where it came from, or who might have been hurt by it." Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Most people don't. It's easy to believe the story you've been told your whole life, especially when it benefits you. But once you see the other side, you can't unsee it." She nodded slowly, her gaze distant as she processed his words. For a long time, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them like a fragile thread. Monica felt as though her entire worldview had shifted overnight. She no longer knew where she stood or what she believed in. But one thing was clear: she couldn't go on pretending everything was fine, not when the truth was staring her in the face. "What are you going to do now?" Marcus asked softly, breaking the silence. Monica looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and resolve. "I don't know," she admitted again. "But I can't just sit here and do nothing." For the first time, Marcus saw a glimmer of something new in her, a determination that hadn't been there before. She wasn't the same woman who had stormed out of her father's office, fuming at being forced into a marriage she didn't want. She was starting to question the world she had lived in, and Marcus could see that she was beginning to change. "I want to help," she said suddenly, her voice steady. "I want to do something, to make things right." Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised by her sudden shift in attitude. "You're serious?" "I am," Monica said firmly. "I've been living in a bubble my whole life, and it's time I did something about it. If what you said is true, if my father has hurt people the way he hurt you, then I want to help fix it." Marcus studied her for a moment, unsure whether to believe her. But there was something in her eyes that convinced him she was telling the truth. Slowly, he nodded. "If you're serious about this, it's not going to be easy," he warned. "Taking on your father's empire, exposing what he's done, that's a dangerous game." "I know," Monica replied, her jaw set with determination. "But I don't care. I'm not going to stand by and watch anymore." For the first time since they'd been thrown into this mess together, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could be more than enemies trapped in a forced marriage. Maybe they could become allies. Monica and Marcus began their quiet work in earnest. It started slowly with whispered conversations and late nights spent huddled over papers and laptops in the privacy of their home. The walls of their marriage, once built on resentment and cold indifference, now began to crumble as they formed a tentative partnership. They had a shared goal: exposing Edward Grayson's unethical business practices and dismantling the empire he had built on the backs of others. Monica, with her insider knowledge of the company, took the lead in gathering information. She combed through old files, financial records, and confidential emails, piecing together a web of shady deals and backroom negotiations. The more she uncovered, the more her anger grew, not just at her father, but at herself for having been so blind to it all. But anger, she realized, could be a powerful motivator, and she used it to fuel her determination. Meanwhile, Marcus brought his technical expertise to the table. Though his company had failed, he had once been a skilled engineer with a sharp mind for strategy, and he used that knowledge now to help Monica navigate the maze of corporate corruption. He knew the kinds of tactics Edward had used to crush smaller companies. After all, he had been a victim of them himself, and he knew how to look for the signs. Together, they made a formidable team, their shared mission gradually bridging the gap that had once separated them. At first, their conversations were all business, strategic, focused on the task at hand. But as the days passed, something began to shift between them. The tension that had defined their relationship for so long began to ease, replaced by a growing sense of respect. Monica had always thought of Marcus as quiet and unassuming, but now she saw the depth of his intelligence, his resilience, and the quiet strength that had allowed him to endure everything her father had done to him. For his part, Marcus started to see Monica in a new light. She was no longer the spoiled, entitled woman he had first known. There was a determination in her now, a willingness to admit her own ignorance and make amends. She was still learning, still grappling with the enormity of what her father had done, but she wasn't backing down. That more than anything impressed him. One night, after hours of poring over documents and plans, Monica looked up from her laptop, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Do you think we'll really be able to do this?" she asked quietly, her voice laced with uncertainty. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. "It won't be easy," he said. "Your father is powerful and he's careful. He's built his empire on keeping things hidden. But with the right evidence and the right timing, yes, I think we can do it." Monica sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It just feels so big, like we're taking on a giant." Marcus gave her a small, reassuring smile. "David took on Goliath, and he won," she smiled back, though it was faint, her weariness showing. "I guess I never thought I'd be the one trying to take down my own father." "It's not just about your father," Marcus said gently. It's about justice, for the people he's hurt, for the lives he's ruined. You're doing the right thing, Monica. His words struck a chord in her, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all, the betrayal, the guilt, the anger. But then she pushed it aside, reminding herself that this wasn't about her emotions. This was about making things right. As the weeks went on, their plan began to take shape. Monica and Marcus worked late into the night, slowly but steadily building their case. They gathered evidence of fraudulent business practices, unethical acquisitions, and the mistreatment of smaller companies. Marcus used his technical skills to dig deeper into the company's digital records, uncovering files that had been buried for years. It wasn't just about taking down Edward. It was about exposing the entire system of exploitation that had allowed him to thrive. In the midst of all this, Monica and Marcus grew closer. The initial awkwardness of their forced marriage had faded, replaced by a growing sense of trust. They still had their differences, but the shared purpose had created a bond between them that neither of them had expected. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, they found themselves sitting together in the living room, a comfortable silence hanging in the air. Marcus glanced over at Monica, who was leaning back against the couch, her eyes closed. "Thank you," he said quietly. Monica opened her eyes and turned to him, a puzzled look on her face. "For what?" "For helping me," Marcus replied. "You didn't have to do any of this. You could have ignored it, kept living your life, but you didn't. You chose to do something. That matters." Monica looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I guess I'm finally learning what it means to take responsibility." Marcus smiled faintly, and for the first time, Monica felt a warmth between them, a sense of camaraderie, of mutual respect. They were no longer two people forced into a marriage they didn't want. They were partners working together toward a common goal. And that, Monica realized, was something she hadn't expected. The moment they had been preparing for finally arrived. Monica and Marcus set their plan in motion, and it felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. All their late nights, the countless hours spent uncovering buried secrets, were about to pay off. They had built a compelling case, documented evidence of Edward Grayson's unethical business deals, aggressive takeovers, and the calculated destruction of smaller companies like Marcus's. Now it was time to bring it all to light. The first step was a series of carefully timed leaks to the press. Anonymous reports, backed by solid evidence, began to surface. Journalists started digging, and soon stories appeared in reputable news outlets detailing the shady practices that had fueled the rise of Grayson Industries. The articles revealed how Edward had ruthlessly undercut competitors, exploited loopholes in regulations, and manipulated contracts to his advantage. The public was appalled, and the outrage grew as more details came to light. Monica had expected to feel satisfaction, even vindication, as the headlines began to spread. But instead, there was a heaviness in her chest, a nagging sense of guilt she couldn't quite shake. She knew her father had brought this on himself, that the empire he had built was rotting from the inside. Still, watching it unravel in real time was harder than she'd imagined. She glanced over at Marcus one evening as they watched the news, the latest report flashing across the screen. "How do you feel about all this?" she asked quietly. Marcus didn't answer right away, his gaze fixed on the television. His jaw was set, his expression unreadable. "I'm not sure," he admitted finally. "This is what I wanted, for the truth to come out, but it doesn't feel as good as I thought it would." Monica nodded, understanding all too well. She had expected some sense of triumph, a victorious moment where everything would click into place. But instead it felt messy, complicated. She wasn't just exposing a corrupt businessman. She was watching her father's life fall apart. "I guess we're both feeling a little conflicted," she said softly. Marcus turned to her, his eyes softening. "Yeah, it's not as black and white as I thought it would be." Despite the complexity of their emotions, the plan moved forward. The leaks had sparked investigations, and soon government agencies were involved. Edward Grayson's empire was under scrutiny like never before, and the pressure was mounting. Investors were panicking, pulling out of deals, and the company's stock began to plummet. Every day, more evidence surfaced, and the once untouchable Edward Grayson found himself fighting to keep his company afloat. Monica watched her father on the news, giving terse statements to reporters, his face drawn and pale. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in the span of a few weeks. She hadn't spoken to him since the leaks began. Part of her wanted to reach out, to ask him what he was thinking, but she knew there was no going back. The truth was out, and there was nothing she could do to stop the fallout. For Marcus, it was a bittersweet victory. He had spent years dreaming of the moment when Edward Grayson would be held accountable for what he had done. Not just to him, but to the countless others who had been steamrolled by Grayson Industries. But now that it was happening, Marcus found himself grappling with unexpected emotions. Justice was being served, but the cost, seeing a man's life unravel so publicly, was heavier than he had anticipated. One evening, as they sat together, Monica turned to Marcus. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Marcus looked at her, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, my father deserves this, right? He's done terrible things, but I didn't expect to feel so torn." Marcus considered her words for a moment. "I think it's normal to feel that way. You're his daughter. It's not easy to watch someone you love face the consequences of their actions, even if they deserve it." Monica stared at the floor, her thoughts swirling. "I used to think he was invincible," she said quietly, "like nothing could touch him. And now, he looks so small, so vulnerable." Marcus reached out, placing a hand on her arm. "He's not invincible. No one is. But this isn't just about him, Monica. It's about all the people who've been hurt along the way." "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just didn't expect it to feel this way." As the days passed, the pressure on Grayson Industries continued to mount. Lawsuits were filed, regulators launched investigations, and Edward's once loyal allies began to distance themselves from him. The empire he had built was crumbling, and there was no stopping it now. But for Monica and Marcus, their work was far from over. They had set out to expose the truth, and they had succeeded. Yet as they watched the fallout unfold, they realized that this was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, rebuilding something better from the wreckage of Edward's legacy. Together, they knew they would face new obstacles, but for the first time, they felt like they were on the same side. The partnership that had started out of necessity had grown into something stronger, something real. And though they had taken down a giant, their story was far from over. As the dust settled from the chaos surrounding Grayson Industries, Monica and Marcus found themselves at a crossroads. They had accomplished what they set out to do, exposing the corruption that had propped up her father's empire for so long. Edward Grayson was now facing public humiliation, multiple lawsuits and investigations that would haunt him for years. The company he had built was a shell of its former self, and Monica had to face the reality that her life would never be the same. But in the quiet moments that followed the storm, Monica realized something had shifted. It wasn't just about bringing down her father anymore. Somewhere along the way, the desire for revenge had given way to something more meaningful, a desire for justice. Not only for Marcus and the people like him, but also for herself. She wanted to be part of something better, something that wasn't tainted by the mistakes of the past. And she wasn't alone. Marcus had changed too. His bitterness had softened over time, and the quiet anger that had driven him for so long was now tempered by a new sense of purpose. He had gotten what he wanted. He had seen Edward Grayson's empire begin to crumble. But instead of feeling victorious, Marcus found himself thinking more about what came next. The thought of rebuilding, of using the power they now had to create something better, appealed to him far more than the idea of destruction. One night, after another long day of dealing with the fallout, Monica and Marcus sat together in the living room. the glow of the fireplace casting soft shadows around the room. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable or strained. In fact, it felt peaceful. "We've done it," Monica said, her voice soft but filled with a sense of finality. "We've exposed everything." Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Yeah, we did." Monica glanced at him, searching his face for signs of how he was feeling. "But it doesn't feel like it's enough, does it?" He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Number. It doesn't. I thought taking him down would be the end. But now, I'm not sure what I expected." "I guess I didn't either," Monica admitted, drawing her knees to her chest as she curled up on the couch. "But now that we have control, I don't want to just destroy everything. I want to do something better." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about what we've learned, about how many people were hurt because of what my father did. And I don't want to be part of that anymore. If we're going to take control of the company, I want to do it differently. Ethically, I want to make up for the damage he's caused." Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing. It's not just about tearing him down. It's about making sure that the people who suffered because of him get justice, and making sure nothing like this happens again." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their shared decision hanging in the air. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy. Restructuring Grayson Industries into something ethical and sustainable would be a massive challenge. But for the first time in a long time, Monica felt a sense of purpose. She wasn't just living in her father's shadow anymore. She was charting her own path, with Marcus by her side. "What do we do next?" Marcus asked, his voice low but steady. "We start rebuilding," Monica said, her tone firm with resolve. "We change everything from the inside out. No more shady deals, no more ruthless takeovers. We make the company something we can be proud of." Marcus nodded again, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I like the sound of that." Monica met his gaze, and for the first time, she felt a genuine connection between them. Something deeper than just the shared experience of their marriage or their plan to bring down her father. There was respect and something else that had been growing quietly in the background, unnoticed until now. Affection. "Marcus," she said softly, her voice hesitant, "thank you for everything. I couldn't have done any of this without you." He smiled at her, the warmth in his eyes undeniable. "You're stronger than you think, Monica. But I'm glad we did this together." As they sat there side by side, they both realized that the bond between them had changed. What had started as a cold, forced arrangement had evolved into something more, a genuine partnership built on trust and understanding. They weren't just two people bound by a contract anymore. They were allies, and perhaps even more than that. Monica felt her heart soften as she looked at him, realizing just how far they had come. And for the first time since her father had forced them into this marriage, she didn't feel trapped. She felt free. "Whatever comes next," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination, "we face it together." Marcus nodded, and the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. They had started this journey with one goal in mind, but now they were building something new, a future they could shape together, on their own terms. With their decision made, Monica and Marcus set their sights on the final steps of their plan. The leaks and investigations had shaken Grayson Industries to its core, but the real challenge still lay ahead, taking control of the company. They needed to secure enough shares to stage a hostile takeover, a move that would solidify their power and allow them to rebuild the business on their terms. Monica had been laying the groundwork for weeks, using her position within the company to discreetly buy up shares, all while maintaining a low profile to avoid suspicion. It wasn't easy. Edward still had allies within the board, and there were investors who remained loyal to him, despite the growing scandals. But with each passing day, the tide turned more in their favor. Monica's reputation as her father's daughter, combined with her insider knowledge, gave her an advantage she hadn't anticipated. People trusted her, and she was able to quietly amass enough shares to tip the balance of power. Marcus worked behind the scenes, ensuring that the plan unfolded smoothly. His technical expertise and understanding of the corporate world proved invaluable as they navigated the intricacies of the hostile takeover. Together, they formed a strategy that was equal parts precise and daring, a plan that required perfect timing and careful execution. As the pieces fell into place, Monica couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. Taking control of the company meant more than just dismantling her father's legacy. It meant stepping into the spotlight herself, owning the decisions she had made, and taking responsibility for the future of the business. She had never imagined she'd find herself in this position, but now that she was here, she felt ready for it. One afternoon, as they finalized the last details of the takeover, Monica found herself alone in her father's office. She stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline that she had always taken for granted. The view had once symbolized power, control, everything her father had worked for. But now it represented something different. To her, it was a reminder of the choices she had made, the path she had chosen to walk. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening behind her. Marcus stepped into the room, his expression serious but calm. "It's done," he said quietly. "We've secured enough shares. The board meeting is tomorrow. It's time." Monica turned to face him, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and resolve. "I guess this is it then." Marcus nodded, his gaze steady. "Are you ready?" She took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over her. "I am." The next day, they walked into the boardroom together, side by side. The air was thick with tension as the board members, many of whom had been loyal to Edward for years, sat around the long table. Edward himself sat at the head, his face etched with exhaustion and disbelief. He knew something was coming, but the extent of it had yet to be revealed. Monica took her seat, her hands steady as she placed her documents in front of her. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, but she didn't waver. This was the moment they had worked for, the moment that would determine the future of Grayson Industries. As the meeting began, Monica laid out her case. She spoke calmly and confidently, detailing the company's recent scandals, the lawsuits, and the loss of investor trust. She didn't shy away from the hard truths, acknowledging the damage that had been done under her father's leadership. But then she pivoted, explaining how the company could recover, how it could be rebuilt on a foundation of ethics, transparency, and fairness. She made it clear that the only way forward was with new leadership. When she finished speaking, the room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Edward sat frozen, his eyes fixed on his daughter, as if seeing her for the first time. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Marcus stepped in. With a quiet authority, Marcus presented the final move in their plan, the official transfer of shares, giving them controlling interest in Grayson Industries. The vote was swift and decisive. One by one, the board members cast their votes, and with each one, the outcome became clearer. Monica and Marcus had won. They were now the majority shareholders, and the company was theirs to lead. Edward sat in stunned silence, his hands clenched tightly on the table in front of him. His empire, the one he had built from nothing, was no longer his. But as he looked at his daughter, standing tall and composed, he seemed to understand that this was the natural conclusion to the path he had set in motion. After the meeting ended, Monica walked over to her father. She could see the pain in his eyes, but she also saw something else, a quiet acceptance. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said softly, "but this is what has to happen. It's time for a new direction." Edward nodded, his voice barely audible as he spoke. "I suppose I taught you too well." Monica smiled faintly, feeling the weight of everything that had transpired. "Maybe you did." As she and Marcus left the boardroom together, hand in hand, Monica felt a sense of closure. But more than that, she felt a new beginning. This wasn't just the end of her father's reign. It was the start of something better, something they would build together. And for the first time, Monica was truly ready to face whatever came next. With the company now in their hands, Monica and Marcus wasted no time in reshaping Grayson Industries. They moved swiftly, implementing new policies that prioritized ethics, transparency, and fair treatment for all employees and partners. Gone were the days of ruthless acquisitions and hidden deals. In their place, Monica and Marcus built a culture of integrity, one where success didn't come at the expense of others. As the weeks passed, the transformation was undeniable. Employees, once fearful of the company's cutthroat nature, began to embrace the new direction. Monica led with a calm determination, her vision for the future clear. Marcus, with his technical knowledge and sense of justice, became her trusted partner, ensuring that the company's operations aligned with the values they had fought so hard to restore. Their relationship, once born out of obligation, had blossomed into something genuine. No longer two strangers forced together by circumstance, they were a true team, equals both in business and in life. The respect and trust they had developed through their shared struggle had deepened into something neither of them had expected: love. As for Edward, he lived quietly now, far removed from the empire he once controlled. Monica had kept her promise, leaving him with enough to live comfortably, but without the power that had once defined him. In time, he began to reflect on the lessons he had tried to teach his daughter, only to realize that he was the one who had been taught the greatest lesson of all: humility. In the end, Monica and Marcus had not just taken control of Grayson Industries, they had transformed it. Together, they had built a new legacy, one founded not on greed or ambition, but on fairness, justice, and love. It was the beginning of something truly remarkable, and for the first time, Monica felt like she had found her place in the world. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Now, how about another one? To watch another nice story, just click on the video appearing on your screen.